Anyway, next we have here. So as I mentioned earlier, it was interesting, right? If you think about it in terms of taxation, right? The more money that you earn, that you have, you should be taxed more. Somewhat fair if you think about it. The less has should be taxed less, the more should pay more. But in reality, in particular in the United States, you have the super rich people pay little to no tax, income tax at all. And according to BBC.com here, and you know, obviously it wasn't a surprise for me. I know they're paying little to no tax using, I would say, loopholes. So would you consider that they're cheating? No, not really. So let's see here. So as I mentioned, the billionaires that we're talking about is Mr. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, just to name a few. Now, there was a leaked info regarding on a news website regarding the income tax that those billionaires are paying or not paying technically. Now, whether that's considered fair or not, well, we'll dive a little bit deeper here. And so you have here Mr. Jeff Bezos, the former CEO of Amazon, paid no tax at all on the year 2007 as well as 2011. Okay? Then you have Mr. Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX actually, paid nothing in 2018. Now, how is that even possible? Is it even considered illegal? So should the IRS, uh, sue them, for fraud and so forth? Actually, there's nothing illegal about to their said activities. So obviously they own companies, businesses, and their valuation is tied up in terms of share. And if you think about it, shares are not taxed until you earn dividends or sell your shares, so that the proceeds that you earn from it, that's the only time it's taxed. And obviously, in their vast experience with their lawyers and accountants and so forth, they're always finding ways to shelter their earnings so that they maximize their earnings with little to no tax, no taxation and so forth. Now, there's had been growing debate with regards to not just the regular citizen, whether that's fair or not. Then you also have the government is looking at it closely whether they should be taxed more, because obviously, you know, no matter what the government does, even if they increase the taxation here, the Uber really reached the top 1% of the people in the world or in the United States. There are always loopholes that they could take advantage so that they can pay little to no tax at all. And obviously, this is providing more people becoming more richer, and the widening of the inequality, so to speak, which is, may sound like unfair and unreasonable, right? And according to ProPublica, they mentioned that the richest 25 Americans pay less than 16% of tax. Pretty substantial, right? Typically, whether you're in the United States or in the Philippines, you pay in the north of 20-30% tax. So depending on the bracket that you belong into, right? This is just according to the gross income, right? So obviously, one would wonder, if you're an individual citizen, why am I paying more despite me earning less? How that happen? And then those people who earns more are taxed less. Sounds unreasonable, right? And the key here, as I mentioned, so the how are they able to do that is the ultra wealthy people are able to sidestep the system, so it's legal technically, in an entirely legal way. Okay, so obviously they have the enormous resources that they have people underneath them or they hire, so they have enormous ability to find deductions, find credits, and exploit loopholes in the system. So unless the government cracks down on those loopholes to ensure that, if you're a citizen, regardless if you're poor or middle income or rich, it applies to everyone. Not just because you own a company, you can hide your assets or your earnings, your valuation through shareholders, and you'll not be taxed unless they change the law. Then that's the only time that could affect their approach. And it's not just that; the value of their wealth grows enormously through their ownership of shares in the company. So obviously, let's say you have 1,000 shares and it's worth 100,000. And then if it grows over time, the government cannot tax that until such time you withdraw or you sell those shares. So it can inflate it, which is in a good way. You earn more and you only get what you need. And actually they do a something more, I won't say devious, but another way of whether to, if they really need income to spend, whether buying houses, cars, and so forth. In this case, they also mentioned that they take aggressive tax deduction. So they do this by borrowing funds for their lifestyle. So take note. So they do not use their earnings from their ownership or their, being stockholders. They actually borrow from the bank. So rather than use their earnings, they borrow from the bank, let's say to buy a house, big mansions, whatnot, and even cars or even planes. So what they do is buy an asset. Okay, either build one or inherit one using their fortune and borrow against their wealth. So technically, when you acquire an asset, you have tax deductible here, which is beneficial for your business, right? So that's why they are able to practically get little to zero income tax here. So obviously, if you don't realize any gain or sale with your any stock, there is no income there. So there's no tax. It could not be taxed. It would be impossible to be taxed here. So obviously, what they do here, as mentioned, is they then borrow from a bank at a relatively low interest rate. Obviously, if you have a partnership with many banks where you do business with your own business, and you leave off that and can use the interest expenses as deduction, so you even generate more more deduction for your tax. And that's how they do it. And now you have Biden here, the current president of the United States, to do something about it. Now whether that plans will be effective or be enough, somewhat debatable here. And obviously, the plans for Mr. Joe Biden here is to increase tax on the richest Americans. Now, as I mentioned earlier, increasing the tax of those uber rich may not matter at all. Obviously, unless you close the loopholes of those of the legalities of how individuals can find ways to reduce the tax to practically zero, then it would not make sense anyway. So even if you tax the overreach, the one who gets affected is the one in the middle, the one who earns a high income, or the one in the uh, yeah, the middle income, and close to the top 1% here. Now, whether that's considered illegal, unfair, it may look from the optics that it seems unfair. How come those individuals are able to have the benefits? That's why governments provide tax breaks, benefits, in this case, loopholes for businesses that have, if you have a corporation that supports the economy here, and obviously they get to benefit the most here. So, question is, should we complain about it, or should we ask our government to look at it closely and close those loopholes so that everyone is fair game? The more the money that you own, whether it's cash, liquid, assets, part of shareholders, share you hold shareholding in a company, you still pay a substantial tax here. And until such time that happens, then we still have to wait and see. And obviously, if you have zero assets, you still pay a substantial income. But on the other hand, if you own shares of a company, whether it's worth $1 billion or €1 billion, you get tax deductible, right? Which is kind of ironic, right? That's why I think there was an interview where Mr. Warren Buffett was sharing that he pays even less tax than his secretary. So how ironic is that? He has a better accountant than his secretary here. So whether that's the fault of those billionaires, or maybe the government has to do their part as well, and you know so that there's equality here.